Hello, my name is Eleanor. I'm the Director of Innovative Energy Consultants, and today I'm going to be giving you an overview as to what a business's carbon footprint is. I'm doing this because on May 22nd, myself and Janine and Claire are hosting a webinar looking at how Australian businesses can turn the upcoming mandatory climate-related disclosures from an obligation to an opportunity. And carbon footprints are one of the key things that businesses need to report on as part of mandatory climate-related disclosures. So I put this together to make sure that we're all on the same page when we meet on May 22nd. There's a link to the Humanitix page to sign up to the webinar in this video's description. So if you've not already signed up, please do. I look forward to seeing you all there. To start off, let's take a look at what a greenhouse gas is. A greenhouse gas is any gas that absorbs heat that's reflected from the Earth's surface and traps heat within the atmosphere. This is the greenhouse effect. It's a bit like how the panes of the greenhouse trap heat in the greenhouse. And the greenhouse effect is one of the primary drivers of climate change. A carbon footprint is a way of understanding how much each business is contributing towards the greenhouse effect. A carbon footprint is a measure of the total amount of greenhouse gases emitted by a business. It's called a carbon footprint because most greenhouse gases do contain the element of carbon, although not all. Carbon footprints are measured in tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, and this is to allow us to make an apples to apples comparison between the global warming potential of different greenhouse gases. So, for example, if we emit 1 tonne of methane, that has the same global warming potential as emitting 25 tonnes of carbon dioxide. So this 1 tonne of methane we would call 25 tonnes of CO2 equivalent. And that helps us get a total picture in one unit of all of the greenhouse gas emissions of a business. The businesses that I work with tend to measure their carbon footprints either because they're required to by regulations like the UK's streamlined energy and carbon reporting requirements, or because their customers have asked them to. Some of the businesses I work with measure their carbon footprints for the same reason that their customers are asking for a carbon footprint or that regulation requires it, and that's to help them identify improvement opportunities. By measuring our carbon footprint, we can understand where the low-hanging fruit lies in terms of reducing emissions, and we can look at what the biggest sources of emissions are and know where we need to concentrate our efforts to reduce our environmental impacts. We measure carbon footprints using the guidance provided by the Greenhouse Gas Protocol. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol divides emissions into 3 scopes: Scope 1, Scope 2, and Scope 3. Scope 1 is all emissions that are produced by sources that a company owns or directly controls. So, for example, if a company owns a boiler, the natural gas burnt in that boiler. Scope 2 are emissions that are indirectly produced by the company through its procurement of electricity, steam, heating, or cooling water. And Scope 3 are all other indirect sources of emissions. So your supply chain, your customers using your product, your employees getting to work, that's all Scope 3. We're going to take a deep dive and look at different examples of each type of scope now. Starting off with Scope 1. Most common sources of Scope 1 emissions are stationary combustion. So that's anything that your business burns within your office or your manufacturing facility. So that could be natural gas in a cooker, it could be propane in a barbecue, or I've even worked with some businesses that have wood-fired pizza ovens. Or if you're a manufacturing facility, it could be a combined heat and power unit. Anything that is burned on your site is a Scope 1 emission. Other common sources of Scope 1 are emissions from vehicles, and that's vehicles that your company owns. So it's not anybody's individual personal vehicle, it's company cars and it's fleets that are owned by the company. And then finally, an often overlooked source of Scope 1 emissions is fugitive emissions. Fugitive emissions are often refrigerants from things like domestic-sized office fridges and freezers. Then you might have industrial cooling facilities at a warehouse that uses a refrigerant loop, or you may even own a natural gas liquefaction compression unit. Anything that contains a refrigerant, the refrigerant will escape through little cracks in the joints and pipes. And because the global warming potential of a lot of these refrigerant gases is so high compared to the carbon dioxide emitted by burning natural gas, refrigerants can often form a surprisingly large part of your Scope 1 emissions portfolio. Now let's take a look at Scope 2. Most common source of Scope 2 emissions is electricity used to power things like lights, office equipment, like computers, or if you're at a manufacturing facility, you might have pumps, conveyor belts, that kind of thing. But an often forgotten source is steam and cooling and heating water. So if you're a manufacturing facility, you might actually be buying your steam from a site next door, and the emissions produced in raising that steam are your scope 2 emissions. And then scope 3 is by far the most varied sources of emissions. So it's all of your supply chain, so extraction of raw material, shipping that raw material to you, and then shipping your finished product to your customer, how your customer uses the finished product, and any waste that's produced both in your own manufacturing and the end of life use of your products by your customers. And so, like all sources of scope 3s, these are things that are outside of your direct control. You can do things like provide your customers with instructions on how to recycle your products, but you can't mandate how they're going to use your products. It's out of your direct control. Other sources of scope 3 are all the things that need to happen to make your business run. So that's business travel, employee commuting. And then if you're a bank or financial services industry, the emissions from your investments, they will count towards your scope 3 emissions. And the Greenhouse Gas Protocol does divide scope 3 into 15 different categories. And I find this really useful to go through and make sure we've caught them all. Not every business will need to measure every source of scope 3. That's a conversation you need to have internally to decide, why are you measuring your carbon footprint? Is it to comply with regulations, in which case you need to check the regulations? Is it to understand how your products are being used as part of a life cycle assessment so that you can provide that information to your customers? The motivation for measuring your carbon footprint and the information you have to hand will help you decide which of these 15 categories you want to measure. And you might start off measuring 5 or 6 categories, and then each year you might add more and more categories as you get more data available. The important thing is just to start measuring, start analysing that data and making the changes that your business needs to make to reduce its emissions. So if you've got any questions, please do contact me on info@innovative-energy.org. And you can check out our website, www.innovative-energy.org, for more information, and follow us on LinkedIn. We post a weekly sustainability moment. But most importantly, sign up for the webinar on May 22nd, and I'll see you there. Thanks so much.